Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we were reviewing The Teacher's Lounge. Directed by Ilker Çatak, The Teacher's Lounge follows Carla, a teacher tasked with finding out which of her students is responsible for a series of thefts. The film stars Leonie Benesch. So Jeffrey, what do you think about The Teacher's Lounge?
So The Teacher's Lounge, I think, is basically like an Ask Our Farhadi movie that takes place in a school.
That's so true. I didn't think about that way until you mentioned it.
So to follow that comparison to its logical extension, we follow characters who seemingly do the right things and have very good intentions, but that ultimately leads to escalation and potentially catastrophe. Primarily, that this reminded me of Ask Our Farhadi's work and what he's so good at with moral complexity. It's a film where I continually found myself saying, oh, well, why doesn't this character just do this? Oh, wait. But if they did that, then it would have these ripple effects that would affect this. Anyway, as an audience member, you're looking at the ripple effect of all of these actions that would have on various other circumstances, so on and so forth down the rabbit hole, that you really get stuck in these moral quagmires that the characters themselves are in. It creates these moral conundrums that I was just so fascinated by, especially for a film that frankly is so entertaining. I mean, it's a kind of a dark watch, but it's a suspenseful watch. It's very, very tense. It's a quick 90 minutes. It breezed by. I was on the edge of my seat from the second it started. I'm actually want to talk about how this film started in a little bit. But anyway, I'll hand it over to you. I just thought it was great.
I really thought this was a great movie, and that's exactly where I was going to go so we could have an understanding of this tension and where it all comes from. Because at the beginning of this film, we're pretty much just thrown into this scenario. Somebody's stealing money, and they are starting the film by interrogating these two students.
It almost starts like in the middle of a phone call.
Oh, yeah.
She's literally in the middle of a phone call. It's almost feels like it's mid-sentence. That's how we're just thrown into this.
Yeah, which is a bit confusing when you first get into this movie.
Yeah.
You have no understanding of what's happening in the moment, so you just have to settle down and just wait a little bit.
But it does bring an immediate unease.
Yes. From there, we have this interrogation of these students, which I think illuminates us a lot to Carla as a character. Mm-hmm. There are clearly things that the other administrators and teachers are saying that are also in the room that she finds to be pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I think seeing a scene like that where the coercion is so subtle. You know, they continually say that you don't have to do this, you don't have to answer, and all that really does is reinforce the fact that you do have to answer.
Yeah, meanwhile, like physically leering over the kids and like pointing on a book and saying, please point to the person, nod when you see somebody you're suspicious of. It's like, okay, you don't have to do this, but I'm standing really tall over you.
Yeah, especially in retrospect, it's really brilliantly staged, that scene. But in my opinion, you immediately side with the students because I'm like, what is this? And you immediately side with her because she's defending the students. And obviously, that gets quite a bit more murky and complicated as we go on, but quite a way to start the film and like literally the edge of my seat, great posture, the second that this film started.
So I want to go back to Carla as a character who is played by Leonie Benesch. I thought she was absolutely fantastic in this role, and she really has to carry this film because she is the main character. She had this beautiful simmering attention about her and this anxiety in her facial features. I feel like the restraint of her emotional responses really commented on her urge to remain as like moral and impartial as possible. And she's constantly trying to do this right thing in a world that doesn't really abide by the same rules as her. Everybody else seems to either be morally conflicted or doing the wrong thing and not really admitting to the problems that they have. That leaves her in a tough place when she is in a relationship with these people, whether it's a relationship to her students or whether it's a relationship to the parents of these students or whether it's a relationship to other people that are at work or coworkers.
I know this is really, really stupid, but do you know the song "It's Hard Out There for a Pimp" by 3 6 Mafia? Yeah. I kept singing that song and saying, "It's hard out here for a moralist." It's hard out here for a moralist. Anyway.
The struggle is real. I really related to this character.
I know, she reminded me of you. The main character has tremendous moral fervor. And I think perhaps she's so protective of her students that sometimes I fail to identify with her at certain points. Sometimes I feel like she lacks the moral complexity that the film has, which doesn't mean she's a bad person or a bad character in any regard. But I think she often unwittingly makes situations worse because of her moral fervor, which is a really interesting thing to think about because obviously so many of the things that she does or so many of the actions she takes in this film are, in my mind, morally righteous and yet make things worse. She has this tendency to always give someone the benefit of the doubt, and she always gives them an opportunity to atone for their sins, so to speak. She actually reminds me, it's kind of another odd comparison, but she reminds me of David Tennant in Doctor Who. His particular iteration of Doctor Who would always give someone the moral choice because he couldn't simply just evaporate someone from existence. So anyway, she creates the situation for somebody to apologize, and she seems so disappointed when people don't take that opportunity seriously.
Yeah, I was about to say a lot of that in the same way, so I'll say the spiel I have and we'll see how much it compares or little differences that we have.
Yeah.
But one of the things I noticed about this film is that in a way it's actually really about how difficult it is to be a teacher. The film has a lot to say about the way teachers have to balance an effective relationship with each of their students, like individually, so that they can learn while also answering to their parents' criticisms of you. But the parents, their criticisms of you come specifically from the students
Who have their own biased perspectives.
Exactly. So they don't really have an understanding of you as a teacher at all. Not only is it dealing with these parent-teacher relationships, but also the teacher-student relationships, it's also dealing with the element of relationships with your coworkers and the politics of school administration. On top of that, you have your normal-ass job of having to grade papers and teach students the curriculum.
Her relationship with students and her relationship with faculty, just on a personal level.
Yeah, there's so much going on here. And I think it almost seemed like impossible to be a teacher the way she was living her life. The film shows the amount of pressure society puts on teachers and the greatness that is expected in return. We expect so much, but give so little. The movie has a point to make of that, especially with the sequence, the teacher and parent night, where all the parents come in and they have a lot to say, and she doesn't really get much of a word in at all. I think on a personal level, Carla as a teacher, from what we see, because we get to see her for who she is, she really meets those expectations.
The film devolves in its second half, but before that, she has tremendous control of her classroom and seems to have really great educational methods.
She is extremely intelligent. She is a very considerate teacher. She works very hard, and that's visualized in the film by the attention she gives her students, whether they excel or not, and by the amount of late nights that she spends grading tests. We see her still at school while it's dark outside, and she's still doing work. So there is no doubt about her devotion to her work and her job and her students. But one thing you did say, and I really loved about this film as well, is that it is about the devolving of the classroom in a way and how you could lose control. As you said, she has great control over her class. She's doing little hand things at the beginning. And if she needs to get people's attention, she'll clap twice and then everybody in the class will clap twice. And it seems very effective at working. But when the students seemingly lose trust in her, whether it's right or wrong, that doesn't matter. She is losing control of the classroom and her ability to do her job.
It's really interesting as a thematic thread to look at just how mistrust can just permeate through a group of people so fast as happiness or cynicism or anything else you can think of. That slow little infusion of mistrust throughout the film actually really makes disastrous consequences towards the end.
Yeah, it's also a film about how gossip and lies and slander move faster than the truth. When the truth is something that has to be verified and has to be looked into, and the only thing you could say is we're looking into it when everybody else is going around running their mouths already, it's too late.
Do you want to say the thing that you always say to me?
What?
Nuance is dead.
Nuance is dead.
Matthew says this all the time, nuance is dead. And I thought of that with this film primarily, not with our main character, but in the way that many other people view the situations that she is in.
Yeah.
They have their own presuppositions. They have their own prejudices that they bring to the table. Their mind is made up before they even say anything. And it's so interesting to see all of those ideas colliding in this classroom.
But if you think about it, if this little one thing is happening within a classroom, what is happening on a bigger level? What's happening in a town? What's happening in a city? What is happening in a country? What's interesting enough, it's a small story about what's happening in a little classroom, but I think the meanings of what's happening in this story have repercussions for all of us.
Yeah, if you wanted to watch this as like a political allegory of some sort, even with all of the stuff about the press, I have a little bit to say about that. But it's super interesting.
That part was especially good. I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah, so actually let's talk about it now. Why not? With this idea, we're talking about satire of the press and how this could be a more extrapolated metaphor. So we have these students that work for the school paper who are honestly well-intentioned, searching for the truth at their own little muckrakers in a certain way, asking questions, trying to decipher who's the victim and who's the oppressor.
Yeah.
Which, even though some of their actions are wrong-footed, I think they have tremendously good intentions, you know, and they're trying to be great journalists. They're just a little inexperienced. I identify with this a lot, actually, because I was a big fan of civil disobedience when I was a student. I don't know if that probably doesn't shock you. I protested the yearbook cover, and there was like a new school lunch program I thought was really stupid, and I wrote letters, and I was in the principal's office all the time. But nothing that was
Did not know that.
nothing that was that bad. It was just like I always had an issue with things, and I had some teachers that were really into the idea of civil disobedience and going about things the right way with protesting. So anyway, I really idolized that peaceful but vehement protest, and to see it here, I mean, it makes me reflect on some of my own actions, but all of them having just the right idea, but in exposing the truth, somehow making it murkier and worse. This is yet another example of a very well-intentioned idea that ultimately leads us further down a negative rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's like a commentary on how certain articles, in their search for the truth, they just raise more questions. But in the meantime, you have a populace that's reading and they become more aggravated by what's in the article. And that's played well with the rest of the people that work at the school and the administration. All the other teachers start having arguments in the teacher's lounge over this paper.
The film has this escalating quiet tension that reaches like a fever pitch towards the end of the film.
We were stressed during...
I was very stressed. I was very stressed out. What's interesting is just as soon as I think that we're about to hit rock bottom in a situation, we find a new rock bottom.
Yeah.
I think in films like this, and this goes back to the Asghar Farhadi point, it doesn't provide platitudes. It doesn't provide any sort of easy answers for its audience. It continues to escalate the anxiety. And the root of the anxiety really lies in how morally correct the answers of the film are, the answers that elude us all along. So we as viewers, I think, feel trapped by this burden of morality that the film puts on us, and it makes us feel very tense. So I think that's the root of it, but it's quite a feat of filmmaking, and I think that's only furthered by the way that it's made. So it's made in this almost like documentary handheld type way, which really builds tension.
The film is entirely close-ups for the most part. There really isn't any wide showing spaces until the very end, which I'll get to.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but it's really meant to focus on these personal relationships. There's a moment where they show all the empty rooms in big wide angles. They're only showing these wide angles when they're completely empty, which I thought was very interesting.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? When the film ended, and this is like in the spoiler territory, I found the part with the Rubik's Cube towards the end to be really insightful and interesting. And I also really liked, in some ways, the way that it's undermined by the credit sequence about how he's being taken out in the chair, Oscar. What did you make of those scenes that you're talking about where everything is empty? Because I found that a little perfunctory, but I could be missing the meaning.
I really have to give more thought to that. I mean, we did just watch the movie a few hours ago, but it could be either how we inhabit places and we kind of mess them up. It's like school is supposed to be a place of learning, and that is the inherent purpose of it. These are supposed to be places where children are supposed to learn, but this film was pretty much nothing about that. It was really about everything.
That's so
but
true.
That.
Yeah, that's so true. That's a great point.
I think when a school is built, it's an empty place, and when we inhabit it, it's being neglected in some way. It's not being used for the purpose that it was meant for. So maybe that's the interpretation that I have.
Okay, I like that interpretation.
Thank you. So from here, I do want to go into a little bit more specifics about the plot and the narrative. So I would consider this spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen The Teacher's Lounge, I recommend seeing it and then coming back to this part, unless you don't care to be spoiled. Because I do want to get into certain aspects of this theft. When we find out it actually isn't by a student, but an other person working at the school.
Allegedly. You're more sold on this than I am.
I am more sold on this than you are. Well, it's because of the video and her blouse.
Well, no, I think she like
wearing the blouse at the school.
I think it's like 90% that she did it, but I think that 10% is very crucial.
I think that's crucial from a moral perspective, so I understand that and I appreciate it. Mrs. Kuhn, who is played by Eva LeBeau, I apologize if I'm pronouncing her name incorrectly. She works in the administrative section of the school. She is found on a videotape to be going through the pockets. Well, not her per se, but her arm. But her arm shows the same blouse that she was wearing that day. So that's why it seems to be that she had taken the money. So after Carla asks for a private meeting with her and tries to bring it up to her attention, to her confess, she gets very defensive. She says she did not do it. Carla decides to take the evidence to the headmaster of the school, at which point she is brought in. There's a big altercation over it, and she storms out. But the catch is her son, Oscar, played by Leonard Benesch.
Who's great, by the way.
Yeah, he is absolutely fantastic in this role. He plays her son, and he is in Carla's class. Now there's this extra dynamic of she is trying to teach a class, which he is present in, and doesn't really quite understand why it is that this whole beef with the mother has happened. But what I love so much about these dynamics is that I feel like the film is commentating so much on the way we take after our parents or our guardians. Because the people who raise us have a profound effect on the people that we become. In Oscar's case, while he seemingly takes some lessons from his teacher, especially with this Rubik's Cube that plays a little part towards the end of the movie, he ultimately falls down the same path of his mother, which is someone who doesn't take responsibility for actions as I see it, pushes them onto other people, and decides to live this disillusioned life about their own failures.
Wow, Matthew, that is very morally unambiguous.
I'm a very morally righteous person. I think she did it.
You do. No, it's really interesting you say that because do you remember Tom's father in the film?
Yes.
Yes. So Tom is the student who is caught cheating, absolutely refuses to admit that he's caught cheating. His father comes in, he's on a cell phone, he barely is paying attention. And the second he sits down, he just starts criticizing. He's like, well, how is my 12-year-old supposed to be able to do these problems? They look like Greek to me. And I'm just like, wow, that is so Tom's dad. So they're clearly paying attention to this kind of thing. I imagine that there's more parallels if I was able to watch the film again, because all of the parents are seated in their kids' seats. So if I'm able to look at who's seated where, I'm sure I could find some more interesting things. But I agree with you. That was a really interesting thread in the film.
Yeah, and I think that's really the devastating aspect of this part of the movie in particular, because Oscar himself is a very intelligent boy. He's the smartest kid in her class. He's always raising his hand. He's always answering the problems. He knows exactly what he's there for. He's there to learn, and he really applies himself to his studying.
So you ready to go to grades?
I am ready to go to grades. I give this movie an A-. I really, really enjoyed it. Also, we were talking slightly about the ending. I want to say I really, really loved the way the movie ended. I think with this ratcheting of tension that the movie has during it, you really think this movie is going to end in a bombastic fashion. Do you think something bad's going to happen or something big's going to happen? And this movie doesn't really go there. It ends up becoming a very subtle, more muted ending.
So I give the film a B+. I think it's lovely. I mean, we talked about all the ways in which it's really good. I can think of very few films that I was as intensely involved this year as I was with this film. I will say it's interesting that you brought up the ending because I feel like that's the only part of it that's slight. Maybe I'm just a traditionalist or whatever with plot, but I do feel like when you're ratcheting up all of that tension to just have it wisp out like that is not exactly what I was looking for. I'm not totally sold on my interpretation of it. I think I may need longer to like think about it because I really like the Rubik's Cube aspect of it.
Yeah,
and if it had ended there, I think I would have been okay with it.
The scene that follows in the credits sort of takes away from that.
It does. It almost completely undoes it.
And that's why I talked about their relationship earlier and how the generational impact of your family members and effect on your children.
Yeah, and I understand that. But I think that the ending somewhat shows a script that didn't start at the end and work backwards. It started with a great idea and continually made it worse until they didn't know what to do anymore.
Interesting.
Possibly.
Okay.
Possibly. I'm not totally sure it had an exit plan, but all along the way, what a watch this movie was.
A stressful watch.
Yes.
But great.
So that's it for a review of The Teacher's Lounge, which is now playing in theaters. If you've seen it, let us know what you think of the film. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.